I'm Andrew Dhaenens. I'm an academic within UNSW Business School. I'll be covering a slightly different angle, but one that certainly complements exactly what Margaret and Carol were talking about. I'll be covering a little bit about media outlets, different ones, as well as timing considerations that go along with that. I've been incredibly active and probably one of the most active junior scholars around in the HR and OB field in terms of doing publications and contributions to media. And so I get a lot of questions about what this looks like, what to watch out for, and really how to get started. So that's what I'll be talking about today. I have covered a variety of different outlets from trade publications to mainstream media, covering different industries and different publication outlets, like things like going from HRM Magazine to Lawyers Weekly. I've covered liberal outlets as well as conservative outlets as well. And you'll see that I've covered a lot of different topics and everything from turnover right to disconnect legislation, organizational change, commuting costs, managing work arrangements. You might say, wow, that's a really wide field. In many ways, these are just related to our own expertise. These are topics that I would feel most HR academics have the capability to talk about and cover. You just have to go about it a certain way. We're often talked about the question about how do we enhance our research impact? And we even have discussions about, how to do that, how to be more engaged scholars. And I think of it as in the same way that Carol presented the triangle, and for people watching this online as well, is I would say it's actually to put impact first, put impact before your research. Think about this first and foremost, because it's really going to change your audience and how they receive it. The realities of our social impact and engagement is, our academic research is too narrow, too slow, and too unwieldy for most audiences. That's the same case for our practitioner-oriented outlets, even the publisher spotlights that we often have after we publish an academic piece. But because this is naturally because we've thought about and worked on it for a long time in our areas of work and a level of depth that most everyone hasn't done so. So if we want to have more impact or engagement, we need to meet the problem head on. We need to discuss the consequences and offer solutions. And a specific example of that is I do turnover research, I do managing change. Turnover is always a big problem, but the timing of it evolves and changes. Sometimes we're in great markets where it's incredibly competitive to find good talent. It's incredibly costly. Lots of people renegotiate their jobs. And then there's other times in fields where it becomes a little bit more of an employer's market where that ebbs and flows. And then the career advice switches more to job searches, negotiations, and things like that. But our core area and my research and what we're learning together doesn't change. So ultimately, a lot of the talk about social impact, even push from journal articles, we aren't really doing what's necessary, especially in terms of partnership, timing, and the language that we use, which is a big one. And I would say even some of the pushes from the Academy of Management and a lot of our outlets that are pushing more towards practitioners, we're still using unwieldy language in our titles. So everyday managers, they don't understand it, and they're definitely not going to read it. So our news life cycle from our perspective as academics is we either approach an outlet directly, that's specific journalists, that's specific editors, that might be an outlet like The Conversation. An outlet searches you from what you've done or your area of expertise, finds you via university channels, or it picks it up, the story, from an internal newsroom. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The Conversation is one of those particular places that's external, but still a way to really expand that story. Then you're going to get contacted by several journalists, or you're going to continue that conversation with them, and then you might have more expanded outreach after you've done so about helping that reach maybe your personal network. The overall goal for us as academics and why journalists are interested in talking with us. There's a lot of people who could talk about turnover, or talk about mentoring, or talk about, what our experiences are like working remotely. But our purpose is to provide some expertise to a mainstream audience, but it's to have a credible conversation, and one that comes with integrity. One of the differences is, as academics, we're ideally have a sense of independence, and that presents us an opportunity to, talk credibly about topics because we've dealt with them quite considerably, but also that we have a level of integrity, that we're trying to sell something, or we're not trying to push an agenda. There are many different outlets you can cover, and with each of them, there is a level of awareness that you should have with the differences between those. Mainstream outlets, they will not have a story, and it is not a story unless there is a specific emotion attached with it. If the story doesn't make you feel angry, jealous, scared, nervous, excited, heartwarmed, if you can't put one or two emotional chords attached to your story, or how somebody should feel about hearing your news, it's not a news story. It also has to have scale. As we've talked about before, the larger the scale, the more people it affects, the more significant change that it has for a key demographic or people, the more likely it is to be a story. It also has to have a winner or a loser, heroes or a villain. And this is often the case, that even if you're in a story or a larger segment with multiple voices, they will pit your voice against with another in the spirit of trying to be fair and balanced, or to have a more deeper conversation. Mainstream media outlets are more likely to be what was known as quote shopping, and they might already have an angle in mind. Particularly with commissioned journalists, they will already have had an approved angle by their editors. So they're already going to be coming to you with that idea in mind. Mainstream outlets might be quote shopping. They might try to trigger you and get to say something, or to try to get you off guard or uncomfortable. For example, for me, whenever that was talking about hybrid or remote work or flexible work arrangements, the immediate question is, what does this mean for blue collar workers? But our police officers, our nurses, they can't work remotely. And then you would explain to them, there's a lot we can do with it. There's a lot of opportunities still available, but they'll try to get you off guard with those. They're more likely to publish the most interesting that you say, especially if it opposes other viewpoints. Trade journalists, on the other hand, they're going to have a specific and a stable audience. They're going to have a particular industry that they are working within. So, that it's going to be more inclined to have a longer term relationship. These individuals are more likely to be a little bit more friendly with you, and they're interested in having maybe a longer term relationship. So the conversation will feel different. And in this case, they tend to publish almost everything you say, and you at least will have an opportunity to publish larger quantities of it. And different trade outlets will cover differently, but they can be a good target with that. These individuals are commissioned, so they're paid by different features, or they might be running many, many stories at once. So you sometimes have to grab their attention and just say, I have a topic in mind, or I have a lead, and you send it to a particular journalist, and that can be a larger thing. Okay, if you want to be on the news, some people have these goals in mind, some people don't. Get ready to be fast. The key challenge with the media is they're always looking for a story, and the mainstream is always chasing a breaking story, which means it happens today. And you can be targeted about that. Carol has previously talked about, the idea of targeting Women's Agenda or Women's Day or an international day or event. That's typically going to be fresh on the mind. It can be also quite competitive. The more impactful, the more controversial the topic, the more people and voices want to share their opinions or want to share what they know or their perspective. So there is a balance to be found with that. But realize that when you want to be in the news, you have to be mentally prepared for that you might be at 3 p.m. getting you ready to go to a meeting, and you might be contacted by a major news organization, and it might be something breaking, and it means you need to drop everything you do, suit up, run to the event, and do your interview, and 2 hours later, you're on the nightly news. And so this is what this looks like typically in these experiences. Even if you publish in a newsroom story, it might be the fact that you wake up to news articles and your whole day is going to be different purely because you're going to those audiences. The timing is a huge consideration. It's literally a matter of hours. You realize that your time with the journalist or producer is going to probably be between 10 and 15 minutes. And your time on the news is probably going to be either 2 to 3 minutes, or if it's part of a larger clip, 10 to 15 seconds. So you really need to be very careful and considerate about what is your core message, and can I do that in 10 seconds? Quick answers about different perspectives about what things look like, where to go. Obviously, I've had a diversity of experiences, and not all of these experiences are going to be the right fit for you or maybe for others. And you might have different goals for what you want to do. Based on my experiences, I'd like to just share some quick answers about what I would recommend different things. If you want to have more voice or time or a longer conversation, and perhaps in my view, the friendliest people to work with, go on radio. Particularly the regional outlets, they're always looking to have a conversation about things, and they're really great people to talk to. They're very normal. They're used to talking with a lot of different audiences and really have that diversity of experience. So if you want to have a longer conversation, radio is your best place to do it. Unfortunately, it's also the least likely to be preserved long term, and it's most likely to disappear after you have that conversation. If you're looking for your 12 seconds of fame and make the nightly news, timing is everything. Timing is key. And you have to time a story or a report being released. And there's different ways to do that. But when those are released, you might be able to have your opportunity there. If you're interested in preserving your voice or being just more targeted in your application, particularly around your area of comfort or confidence, trade publications are the place to do that. If you want to get started for the first time, if you're saying, I've never done any outlets, I've never had any experience with doing this, the best place to start is not targeting journalists that publish a lot of different things, but to publish with a columnist who has a weekly topic that they cover. And for example, in Australia, outlets like the Sydney Morning Herald has a relatively approachable column, and there are columnists that have a weekly segment, and they might talk to you about a different topic. And approaching those types of journalists give you a best chance to really get started in this field or industry and to build up some legitimacy as far as you're doing this work. The most inclined to waste your time, I would say the newspaper reporters, the ones that already have an angle in mind, want to say something really specific, and that might not jive with what you want to talk about, and that's okay. Just realize that they're most likely to waste your time if you're not going to meet that angle. And I would say, the difference between outlets and their perspectives about things varies considerably. Radio bulletins, I would also say, are probably number 2 in this, because the reality also for us is we're also not producing breaking news in our research. And so although you'll get lots of calls and attentions about going on the radio bulletin, it's just going to be reported to grab. And unless you say something really controversial or really significant or really crazy, it's probably not going to make your city's nightly reel. And that's a good thing for most of us. So just realize that probably has the biggest danger for academics and probably is not going to be used, but it's good practice and experience. Podcasts, I'm not really sure. They could be huge if they have a really wide audience, and they could be absolutely nothing. They are viewed with less legitimacy, but they also could have larger outreach and really significant interest from a specific demographic at the same time. So I think the whole media field is still open and up for that. Good messages and stories, they're going to relate to personal experience, connect with certain emotions, offer practical tips, use evidence to support your claims, give examples, and link to values. That's a really key one, particularly if you're covering an outlet, and that's a way to connect and link into what the angle that they're trying to describe. I often say that, oh, these are core Australian values. Like these are something that we all want to have happen or achieve. You want to avoid absolutes. There's a whole few of that. If your organization, if your university offers media training, I definitely recommend you do so, because there's a lot of expertise and experience around this as well. Think about your core message. Again, your core message is something that you can say in 9 to 10 seconds. It's the most important thing you want to say. Say it first and often say it often as well. Be prepared to proof points and try to fit and understand the angle that they're coming about. This is easier said than done, but realize that that will fit in with whether the story gets published, whether what you say is used, and potentially some of the danger points about the questions that you're going to be asked. As far as quick tips and interview tools for delivering your narrative, there are different approaches to go about this. Potentially, you could be offered a lot of questions that you feel are off topic or aren't really fitting with what you want to say. So these are ways to help you get back to your core message, the core thing that you really want to get out to everyday people and the wider audience and get it out into your community. And these are all different phrases to help you return to really what you are aiming to say. One thing that I don't feel like people talk or consider enough about is what I would call understanding where your cap is. When we publish in academic journals, our cap is other academics who read that particular journal on that particular topic that you're interested in. That's your cap. Your university might have internal outlets that can help you reach a wider audience than strictly your academic journals. So do publishers as well that can help you have a reflection piece. Even your internal audience might have a different cap as well. And you need to basically find a way to reach the journalists that let you say what you want to say. That's the dynamic when you reach with, for example, we have Business Think at UNSW, which lets academics within the business school or surrounding areas really talk about business. But that differs from reaching UNSW Newsroom, which is going to absolutely hit the eyes and ears of journalists that you need to talk to expand your story. So you need to reach the newsroom and you need to think about the cap, because that is so key to reaching the right audience of what you want to say. We also think about outlets along a political spectrum, but that tends to impact more how your message is perceived rather than the topics is being covered. And one example of that is I've developed a reputation, particularly around when conservative outlets want to talk about well-being. I could help have a moderate conversation about that. And it just impacts what the questions they want to say, but it doesn't impact that the topic is covered. You'd be quite surprised about that. Realize that there's also seasonality across topics. Your afternoons and those core windows are the most likely time where there's space that a journal outlet, a news agency wants to have time filled with something legitimate or substantial. And so afternoons is probably going to be your best window to get research into that camp. Also, around the end of the year, particularly November, time before the holidays, this is also the time and window where there's also the most space to be filled and represents the biggest opportunity for researchers to have unfortunately, it's often when we're the most tired and probably most busy for our academic calendar. So it's comes with considerations. Some closing points here that I would also just add here is academics, we have a research identity. We have some expertise. We have the same brand for our teaching. Realize that the more media you do, the more likely you are to develop a media identity that differs between these two as well. All of my topics comes around the core function of HR and key areas, but my media identity tends to be much more about well-being, tends to be much more about commuting and transport and applications of turnover, which differs slightly from maybe what I had aimed to talk about in a particular week. That's a natural part of it. The final reality is that no matter what we might think about different outlets and fields, journalists and media outlets are really concerned with their own internal policies, and they have their own code of ethics. And there are danger points that we might misunderstand about our relationship with different outlets. You're absolutely going to be recorded. You can certainly say something is off the record or personal, but realize at the end of the day, you are recorded and there's never any guarantee. So be mindful of that. The story has probably already been approved or given space before you even have the conversation with them. So if you want to have the most impact, you really need to consider about where their space or journalists are concerned. And me, being as a younger academic, sometimes I talk with equally journalists who might have the same needs and concerns as me, but their editor is the one that's approved that article. So there's only some certain things that we can talk about. There's rarely time. Again, outlets are really concerned about their code of ethics, about selling things, but also there's just no time to really make that push or that sell. So focus about what you want to talk about, and you can do the selling after you've published the piece and share it in your own personal networks. Certain higher qualities will definitely not allow you to check quotes or see the article before publishing, and it's probably not a good use of your time anyway. Key example of that is Australian Financial Review, which is considered in very high regard within Australia. It's the equivalent of maybe the Wall Street Journal would be the best analogy to that. They're not going to let you see quotes or things like that. It's a part of their journalist and integrity to do so. The journalist will probably tell you that's their policy. And as many times as I've done this, and as many times that I've encouraged it, I've never had a journalist actually send me the article before it's published. Maybe people have better luck with that. You have to ask. They're just too busy. Their journalists these days are covering too many topics and so much going on their plates, just like we are. And you just keep an eye on it. Once it's published, you'll be interested to see how the story echoes. And that is linking back to an outlet like The Conversation. That's the whole purpose of that. Conversation newsroom is to create these bigger echoes. It's your link to this wider audience. And when you publish in these types of articles, because of the republishing agreements, you will see your story being echoed and repeated across many outlets and many journalists that you've actually never spoken to. It tends to be quite similar to what you want to say, so there's really no danger with that, but it can be an interesting thing. So that's a big push for wanting to push those outlets. Okay, thanks for taking the time to listen to me, and especially for the people who came today, as well as might be listening online as well. I wish you good luck in your media contributions as well.